Described as the most unique city in the United States, also Louisiana's most populated and iconic city is New Orleans. New Orleans was defined and shaped by waterways and is known for its Creole heritage, unique dialects, and of course... Really?
That's an accident.
And of course, Mardi Gras celebrations and festivals. The heart of the city is in the French Quarter, known for its French and Spanish Creole architects and nightlife on Bourbon Street. But among the blasting jazz music, fried powdered sugar beignets, juicy jambalaya, and vibrant parade floats lies something much less vibrant and comforting. Dull. Sinister even. Voodoo. A socialite serial killer torturing slaves in her attic. Vampires. Haunted cemeteries, and more. This is the dark side of New Orleans. My name is Kayla, this is Xenu, and we are Cauldron Convos, baby. Cue the smoke machine! Oh, yeah! Suddenly I turn into Michael Jackson, even though he has nothing to do with New Orleans.
Oh my god, I need to take this burlesque mask off.
Woohoo! Take that burlesque mask off, baby. Also, the smoke machine is back. We're back in action. I know all of you guys that missed it. We're back in the typical, usual studio that we have, and we decorated as promised. I mean, it's a little underwhelming, but we do have masks. Got the beads. We earned these fair and square. You know what I mean? But anyway, since this is the last week of Mardi Gras with Fat Tuesday coming up on February 21st, we thought, let's do something New Orleans related and obviously paranormal related. Who do you think we are? We're Cauldron Convos. We have to do the spooky, spine-chilling paranormal stuff that you always want to hear every single week. And New Orleans has a very rich history, culture, food, music, all of that jazz, literally jazz. Wow, I didn't even plan that, but whatever. Jesus! What was that? I've never seen an alien play jazz. This week, we also wanted to thank our first ever sponsor, Walking Pad. The Walking Pad is great for when I'm working, when I'm editing videos, and want to get some steps in instead of just sitting in my chair for literally 8 hours straight. It's awesome because it has a foldable design, so I could just fold it up, put it under my bed. There's not a lot of space here in New York. I don't know if you have a lot of space, but I don't. It saves me space, and it's also simple and easy to use. So easy and simple to use that even my mom can use it, and my mom can barely use her iPhone. So if that says anything, I wish I got one sooner, to be honest.
Love it too. It's great. Thank you, Walking Pad. We love you. Can we get a round of applause and some cauldron smoke? Woo!
And I'm linking the Walking Pad link down in the description below, and you can use the code Cauldron Convos for $100 off. That is $100 off using the code Cauldron Convos just for you guys, and also just to support our channel if you care about us and if you do want to exercise while also simultaneously staying inside all day long, because that's me.
They say sitting is the new smoking.
They do say that. But before we talk about the paranormal of New Orleans and voodoo, I wanted to thank everyone for being here, and the amount of subscribers we've received in the past few weeks, it's literally amazing. We've got almost 20,000 subscribers, and I literally could have never imagined this. I am so grateful for every single one of you that is watching. Even if you're not subscribed, you better hit that button. You better hit it. As a thank you, we wanted to, increase the number of free shirts that we're giving away. If you mail us a letter or anything, then we will send you a free Cauldron Convos t-shirt designed by Xenu himself, printed by yours truly, queen of the... What am I queen of?
Queen of the Voodoo.
I don't know if I can take that title from someone. I think someone like in New Orleans is that right now. They're gonna come up and square up with me and be like, hex me.
Well, probably just a voodoo doll.
Yeah. So what is Louisiana Voodoo? New Orleans Voodoo is a religion which originated in Louisiana through the process of combining different beliefs of West Africa, Roman Catholic form of Christianity, and Haitian Voodoo. There are various deities who were and are still worshipped in Voodoo, such as Blanc Dani, the Grand Zombie, and Papa Labat. And people who practice voodoo would sometimes have altars for these deities and offer sacrifices to them. In addition to deities, those who practice voodoo put an emphasis on the importance of spirits of the dead and sometimes worshiping their ancestors and giving their ancestors offerings such as coins or coffee. We even have some coins right here to give them.
What up?
Ancestors.
Grand Zombie, take my coins.
Okay, I don't want to make fun. You never know who's out there. But anyway, the production of charms, which are known as gris-gris, play an important part of Louisiana voodoo. But how did voodoo even get to New Orleans in the first place? From the early 18th century, enslaved West Africans were brought to the French colony of Louisiana. First, the enslaved West Africans' religion meshed with the Roman Catholic beliefs of the French, since it was a French colony, and then when Louisiana came under Spanish control and was purchased by the United States in 1803, a lot of migrants fleeing the Haitian Revolution actually arrived in Louisiana, hence, meshing all of these religions into one. The fleeing migrants brought their Haitian voodoo, which contributed to the formation of Louisiana voodoo. And many practitioners characterize voodoo as an African-American Creole religion specifically. And although voodoo was not banned, people practicing it were restricted to practice because of the laws that regulated when and where Black people could gather in groups. Practiced secretly, it spread up the Mississippi River to Missouri. During the 19th century, several prominent practitioners such as Marie Laveau and Dr. John attracted considerable attention, and we'll talk about Marie Laveau and Dr. John, the king and queen of New Orleans voodoo, some people like to say, later on in this podcast. But as you probably are somewhat aware, the voodoo religion has long faced opposition from non-practitioners. You probably heard voodoo and was like, ooh, scary, spooky. But that's not what voodoo is supposed to be about. There are people in modern day that practice voodoo, and they're just like you and I.
I feel like hipsters practice
like
voodoo nowadays. It's like a Brooklyn thing.
Non-practitioners have characterized voodoo as witchcraft and devil worship, and many sensationalist portrayals of the religion have featured in popular culture. Like I said about the whole Scooby-Doo thing, Princess and the Frog, we got that guy, the voodoo guy. So if people practicing voodoo don't have satanic rituals like we, think that they have, what kind of rituals do these people practice, right? Like, what are they hiding? What do they got up their sleeves? Little dice, little bones?
I feel like if
you
practice voodoo, you're automatically a magician.
Yeah. And have a hat. Like you have a big hat. Voodoo ritual is actually broken down in 4 phases. The phases of the voodoo ritual can be identified by the song being sung, and those phases and songs are preparation, invocation, possession, and farewell. Damn. Sounds like a relationship. Anyway, these songs are actually used to open the gate between the deities and our human world and invite the spirits to possess people, which we've done a whole podcast episode. Actually, there's our first podcast on exorcisms where, you're trying to expel demons, expel spirits from possessing people. But these songs are encouraging deities to go through the human world and invites the spirits to possess people. Like, that's the goal. So, although it does sound pretty satanic, not gonna lie, hold on to your seats, okay? Give it a chance. Give voodoo a chance, people. Imagine there's like a whole Facebook group. Give voodoo a chance. Whatever.
Give voodoo a chance. Give voodoo a chance. Give voodoo a chance. They're in Brooklyn.
In addition to the different phases, voodoo rituals have seen a commonality with the presence of a snake. Okay, that was too much. Marie Laveau was, for instance, described as communing with a snake during her ceremonies. This practice essentially died out by the end of the 19th century, though some voodoo revivalists have incorporated snake dances into their practices. Which I know, serpents and snakes.
I love Christian churches that have snakes.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing.
You didn't know? Oh my gosh.
They
There's
own them?
great No, they have rattlesnakes and the Lord will protect me. And then they get bit and they die. That literally happens. Google it.
Oh my God, I've never heard of this. But anyway, in addition to snakes, people that practice voodoo might also use charms. And these charms are referred to as gris-gris, like we talked about before, and they're created to help people, but yes, also harm people. A common charm for protection or luck would consist of material wrapped in a red flannel and worn around the neck. And one example of a voodoo curse was to place an object inside the pillow of the victim, which I don't know how you're gonna,
That's pretty sneaky.
you're just gonna grab someone's pillow in the middle of the night. The tooth fairy. Oh, don't worry, it's a tooth fairy. Go back to sleep. Another involves placing a coffin, sometimes a small model, sometimes much larger. Depends what you can get your hands on. Depends the local coffin store.
Yo, there's actually an antique store I went to recently that has coffins for sale. The used ones.
Used.
Used.
They stunk. Stunk. And they're inscribed with the victims' names on their doorstep. So they leave these coffins on it. So you wake up, you're like, okay, you think it's Uber Eats coming. You think you're like donuts are getting delivered. Dozen of donut. Dunkin' Donuts. You open the door.
Dunkin' Donuts.
No donuts. You get a freaking coffin at your doorstep with your name on it. And you're just like, In other instances, voodoo practitioners sought to hex others by placing black crosses, salt, or mixtures incorporating mustard, lizard, bones, oil, and grave dust on a victim's doorstep. Because as you can imagine, New Orleans had a lot of residents practicing voodoo. To counter these hexes, people cleaned their doorstep or sprinkled it with powdered brick. So, like, you have to, if you live in New Orleans, you got to prepare yourself.
Yeah.
You have to counter the voodoo. The potential voodoo. You have to anticipate before it's there. Before the coffin arrives, you got to sprinkle the salt.
Do you think people like clean graves there to get grave dust?
Is that what?
Well, isn't that what grave dust is? Like dust off of a grave?
What do you when someone says voodoo, what do you think of?
Scooby-Doo, Gumbo.
No, voodoo
Dolls, baby.
Voodoo dolls.
Voodoo dolls.
But despite the name voodoo doll, the idea of the voodoo doll has little to do with either Louisiana voodoo or Haitian voodoo at all. It actually derives from the European tradition of puppets. And we did talk about this in our podcast, the Haunted Dolls podcast. If you want to see that one, I'll link it. I'll put it somewhere up here. Save that for later because we do talk about a bunch of haunted doll stuff, such as voodoo dolls and the misconception that voodoo dolls are from, New Orleans voodoo or Haitian voodoo. It's not. It's from Europeans, okay? Those crazies. I don't even know what I'm saying. Shops called botanicas existed and still exist in New Orleans to sell herbs and other material for use in these preparations. And animal sacrifice is a traditional practice in Africa, so when Africans were enslaved in the United States, the practice continued in voodoo and hoodoo. Hoodoo? I do. You do? Voodoo. Wait, isn't that a thing? What's that from? Oh, that's from that David Bowie movie. Never mind.
Dr. Seuss?
No.
Who do voodoo? You do voodoo.
You do. I do. No, the one with the puppets.
I do.
Where David Bowie's like wearing a blonde wig and he's like, ah! Labyrinth. The Labyrinth. Anyway. Ooh. The animals that are sacrificed are typically chickens. By the way, if you were curious. So now that we know the rituals, how it got here, who was running the club, what prominent figures were practicing voodoo. Marie Laveau was also known as the Voodoo Queen, and she was a Louisiana Creole practitioner of voodoo and herbalist who was renowned in New Orleans. She was born a free woman of color, and she was known to take care of the sick in her community during the yellow fever epidemic of 1878 by providing herbal remedies and prayers for the afflicted. Her other community activities included visiting prisoners, providing lessons to the women of the community, and doing rituals for those in need without charge. She started a beauty parlor where she was a hairdresser for wealthy families of New Orleans, and this is where she would get inside information on the wealthy clients that came into her shop. She would listen to ladies gossiping or from their servants whom she either paid or cured of mysterious ailments. Kind of reminds me of in Game of Thrones where they have the little birds, like the connections that listen in. Kind of reminds me of that, where she pays the slaves of people to get the intel. And then she used this information during her voodoo consultations with wealthy Orleanian, is that a word? Orleanian woman?
Orleanian, yeah.
Orleanian? I never heard of it. Interesting. Women to enhance her image as a clairvoyant and use this intel to give them practical advice.
Now, this basically proves that being a clairvoyant is a scam.
It doesn't prove it. It just proves that she was using alternative. She also made money by selling her clients gris-gris as charms to help their wishes come true. And in her role as a voodoo practitioner, customers often appealed to Laveau for help with family disputes, health, finances, and more. Laveau performed her services in 3 main places: her own home on St. Anne Street within Go Square and at Lake Pontchartrain. She was the 3rd female leader of voodoo in New Orleans. The first was Sanité Dédé, who ruled for a few years before being usurped by Marie Laveau. Marie Laveau maintained her authority throughout her leadership, although there was an attempt to challenge her in 1850. How dare her? How dare she?
How dare they?
How dare they challenge Queen Marie Laveau? Due to her strong influence, New Orleans Voodoo lost a large number of adherents after her death. So once she died, everyone was just like, weird, right?
Yeah. The other big player in voodoo is Dr. John, also known as Bayou John. Marie Laveau once teamed up with Dr. John, or Bayou John, to sell potions and charms, and also sold spells. Dr. John was a famous witch doctor who was a free black man who owned slaves in New Orleans. He bought female slaves and married some of them, eventually having 15 wives and 50 children.
Okay.
Excuse me. What? He bought women.
Yeah, so does everyone.
Did you know
Welcome to the world.
Osama bin Laden was one of 52. Dr. John specialized in fortune telling, healing, and making gris.
No, it's gris.
Gris. Sorry. The house was filled with snakes, lizards, and toads, scorpions, and human skulls stolen from graveyards. People of all races came to him for advice to get love potions and or the placing or lifting of curses. Others followed his commands out of fear of Dr. John's secret knowledge. Most of his wisdom did not come from the spirits, but a huge network of black servants all over town. He either bought or took information from them.
Although Dr. John often looked after the poor in his neighborhood and gave away food to the needy, he was tricked several times by unscrupulous businessmen who stole away his fortune. He ended up actually losing all of his money and was somewhat broke by the time he passed away.
Scammer gets scammed.
Broke. You broke, Dr. John. But he was like the king of voodoo, and I don't want to be disrespectful to him because honestly, broke. Icon, Dr. John Bayou. What is voodoo like in New Orleans today? Did it die out? What's going on here? It actually is. There are a ton of voodoo shops such as the Marie Laveau House of Voodoo, Hex Old World Witchery, Reverend Zombie's House of Voodoo, and a ton more. There's a New Orleans historic voodoo museum where tourists can visit to learn about rituals, voodoo altars, and artifacts from Africa, Haiti, and New Orleans. And if you do find yourself in New Orleans on June 23rd specifically, you are in luck because that is St. John's Eve, and it is celebrated in New Orleans and around the world for the summer solstice, which is apparently a big deal in the voodoo community. And St. John's Eve has a special celebration in New Orleans each year and began in the 1830s by Marie Laveau on Bayou St. John. She started a head washing ritual combination with a public party, and this traditional celebration has been adopted by the International House Hotel. So we're getting our heads washed, you know? We're partying.
This is appropriate.
We're washing our heads.
Marie Laveau was a hairdresser.
According to FrenchQuarter.com, Jerry Gondolfo, a native New Orleanian whose family has actually run the Voodoo Museum in the French Quarter since the 1970s, has seen products and places that take the name voodoo. Sometimes the term is used derogatorily in terms like voodoo economics and voodoo science, but at a festival held outdoors under the live oaks, the drums and music could summon the spirits and echo the past, living up to its name voodoo. If done right, the music should take possession of you. Quote, this is a quote that he said. You won't be able to stand still, and if that happens, you are doing voodoo, he said. There is a continuity. I wonder how many people that practice voodoo go to dead concerts. If done right, the music should take possession of you. You won't be able to stand still. And if that happens, you're doing voodoo. Voodoo. Voodoo, doo, 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 voodoo, doo, doo. Skip, 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 doo, but, doo, doo, doo. Skip it, voodoo, voodoo, doo, doo, voodoo, doo, 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 voodoo, doo, doo. Okay. Anyway, moving on.
Should I do a rendition?
Anyway, moving on to the serial killer that kills her slaves. So unrelated to voodoo, just a whole separate section of this New Orleans dark history podcast, we wanted to talk about Madame LaLaurie, who was a New Orleans socialite and serial killer who tortured and murdered slaves in her home without anyone knowing for some time. She got away with this up until 1834 when rescuers responded to a fire at her mansion and discovered bound slaves in her attic who showed evidence of violent abuse.
This would be a good TV show.
It was on a season of American Horror Story, Coven. But after this, LaLaurie's house was sacked by an outraged mob of New Orleans citizens, but she escaped to France with her family. There are mixed accounts of Madame Delphine LaLaurie's treatment of her slaves between 1831 and 1834. For example, Harriet Martineau wrote in 1838 tales told to her by New Orleans residents during her 1836 visit. She claimed the residents noted that slaves of LaLaurie were observed to be singularly haggard and wretched. However, in public appearances, LaLaurie was seen to be generally polite to black people and solicitous of the health of those enslaved. Funeral registers between 1830 and 1834 document the deaths of 12 slaves at the Royal Street Mansion. However, people have pointed out that the causes of death are not mentioned, and infectious disease could have been the cause of the 12 deaths. And the 12 deaths included Bonne, who was a cook and laundress, and her 4 children, Juliette, Florence, Jules, and Leontine. Court records showed that LaLaurie freed 2 slaves specifically, Jean-Louis and Devance, and Martineau wrote that public rumors about LaLaurie's mistreatment of slaves on her property were sufficiently widespread, so much that a local lawyer was dispatched to remind LaLaurie of the laws for the upkeep of slaves. However, during the visit, the lawyer found no evidence of wrongdoing or mistreatment of slaves by LaLaurie.
I wonder if he looked in the attic.
Probably not. Definitely not. And Martineau also recounted other tales that were told among New Orleans residents. She said that subsequent to the visit of the lawyer, one of LaLaurie's neighbors saw an 8-year-old slave girl fall to her death from the roof of the Royal Street Mansion while trying to avoid punishment from a whip-wielding LaLaurie, and that her body was buried on the mansion grounds. Jeanne de Lavigne, in her 1945 account, gave the child's age as 12 years and gave her a name, Leah. Later, writers elaborated on the case, saying that Leah had been brushing Delphine's hair when she hit a snag, causing LaLaurie to grab a whip and chase her. According to Martineau, this incident led to an investigation of the LaLauries in which they were found guilty of illegal cruelty and forcing to forfeit 9 slaves of their household. These 9 enslaved people were bought back by the LaLauries through an intermediary relative and returned to the Royal Street residence. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, that is crazy.
But Martineau also recounted stories that LaLaurie kept her cook chained to the kitchen stove and beat her daughters when they attempted to feed the slaves. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in the LaLaurie residence on Royal Street in the kitchen. The police and fire marshals found the cook, a 70-year-old woman, chained to the stove by her ankle. She later said that she had set the fire as a suicide attempt because she feared being punished. She said that slaves taken to the uppermost room never came back. Reported in the New Orleans Bee in April 1834, bystanders responding to the fire attempted to enter the quarters of those enslaved to ensure that everyone got out. When the LaLauries refused to give them the keys, the bystanders broke down the doors themselves to the quarters and found, quote, 7 slaves more or less horribly mutilated, suspended by the neck with their limbs apparently stretched and torn from one extremity to the other, who claimed to have been imprisoned there for some months. One of those who entered the premises was Judge Jean-Francois. Judge Jean-Francois deposed to having found in the LaLaurie mansion someone wearing an iron collar and a slave who had received a very deep wound on her head who was too weak to be able to walk. When the discovery of the Bayou slaves became widely known, a mob of local citizens attacked the LaLaurie residence and demolished and destroyed everything upon which they could lay their hands. A sheriff and officers were called, but by the time the mob left, the property was very damaged with, quote, scarcely anything remaining but the walls. The slaves were taken to a local jail where they were available for public viewing. The Bee reported that by April 12th, up to 4,000 people had attended to view the slaves, quote, to convince themselves of their sufferings. So after these poor slaves are released from torture, being bound in an attic, for God knows how long, well, they said 7 months or so, they were forced to go to a jail as public viewing, as proof, as evidence for all the people that just, like, didn't believe, like, you know, like show and tell.
Back in the day,
I know,
they did
it's just
things
horrible.
a little differently.
The Pittsfield Sun, citing the New Orleans Advertiser and writing several weeks after the evacuation of LaLaurie's quarters of slaves, claimed that 2 of the slaves found in the mansion had died since their rescue. It added, quote, we understand that in digging the yard, bodies have been disinterred in the condemned well in the grounds of the mansion, having been uncovered. Others, particularly that of a child, were found.
Jeez.
So, She was not doing great things, and she was, she ran away to France. So what about this LaLaurie mansion? Pretty dark place. Now, the mansion traditionally held to be LaLaurie's is a landmark in the French Quarter, in part because of its history and for its architectural significance. But her house was burned by the mob, and the LaLaurie mansion at 1140 Royal Street was rebuilt after her departure from New Orleans. So people claim that this is like one of the most haunted places, or the most haunted places in New Orleans. But if it was burned down and rebuilt, like, don't you think that's a little inauthentic?
Yeah.
Like, LaLaurie Mansion is not the only haunted place New Orleans visitors go to when they want to be scared. They also go to the oldest cemetery in New Orleans, called St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. And famous New Orleanians have been buried at St. Louis No. 1, including Marie Laveau, who we talked about before. Not the slave owner, but the voodoo queen.
Now, I wonder how cursed the dust from her grave is.
In front of Laveau's brick and mortar tomb, her fans actually lay out stacks of nickels, paper flowers, and other offerings for her. Visiting cemeteries such as this one is one of the most popular things to do in the French Quarter. And when Laveau was alive and living on St. Anne Street, people used to knock on her door at all hours looking for legal help, for food, or advice about a straying husband. Her death in 1881 didn't stop that. According to, the guy that ran the Voodoo Museum and his family, he said that in voodoo, an ancestor is as much alive as a living person. You just go to her new home now, regarding her grave, her tomb. That's why everyone goes to visit, especially people in the voodoo community. They go there to talk to her, to give her offerings, to chill with her, all the good things. And other facts about the cemetery is that Nicolas Cage actually owns a large pyramid tomb that he bought for $200,000. So he might be buried there soon.
Smoke for that, baby. Nick Cage.
In his pyramid tomb.
He's got the U.S. Constitution in there.
I know. Also, was he bankrupt? Because people are like, oh, his houses were taken away, but like not his pyramid tomb. I don't
know.
And I was like, what? Anyway.
Not his pyramid tomb.
Like everything else was seized but the tomb.
They're like, give me your tomb.
He's like living in it. He's like brewing he's a Keurig in there.
Is he from New Orleans?
I think so. I think he likes it because it's like spooky. Anyway, due to repeated vandalism, you can only get into this cemetery if family is either buried there or if you are on a guided tour.
Boo. That's just a money scheme.
While in-ground tombs were the first forms of burial in St. Louis Cemetery, you'll notice that the cemetery's graves are actually above-ground monument tombs. And Mark Twain even referred to New Orleans cemeteries as the cities of the dead because they resemble small little houses and it looked like a city in themselves. I also heard that this is because New Orleans is like swampy.
Yeah, it's
so like
below
they used to have
the waterline.
Yeah, so they used to have like dead bodies floating around.
Because the French built it, and
they had like infection just spreading. So they were like, we should probably elevate these tombs.
So gross to think about.
Perhaps the most interesting of the practices at St. Louis Cemetery is the practice of marking the tomb of Marie Laveau with 3 X's while asking her for a favor or making a wish. Legend has it that if the wish is granted by Marie Laveau, the person is required to return and place a gift at the site of her tomb. Unfortunately, this has led to a lot of vandalism, including 2 instances when the entire tomb was painted a Pepto-Bismol pink. Paris Hilton out there like, okay. The result was the Archdiocese of New Orleans closing the cemetery off to the general public after March 2015. Today, only people on licensed tours may proceed inside. Even the change of policy has not stopped guests from experiencing something otherworldly at Marie Laveau's tomb. Visitors have reported all sorts of paranormal happenings while trying to interact with the now-deceased voodoo queen. Feelings of being touched, becoming unexplainably ill, and hearing voices emanating from inside the tomb have all been said to happen on occasion. But on another note, in addition to the spooky, scary, haunted places, the cemeteries, the LaLaurie mansion, there are also apparently vampires of New Orleans. And the story goes that on the corner of St. Anne and Royal Street, there's a deep red building with wraparound balconies. In the 1930s, it was home to John and Wayne Carter, 2 seemingly normal brothers. One day, a young girl escaped their apartment, seemingly running for help with blood soaking her wrists. When the police investigated the apartment, they found 4 people tied to chairs with their wrists slit, as well as dozens of dead bodies drained of their blood. Kim explains that when the brothers returned to the apartment, Quote, "It took all 8 police officers to hold down and detain the brothers who were of average height and build. The brothers were executed for their crimes and buried in a vaulted tomb. Years later, the vault was opened to receive the body of another family member. The workers handling the body were astonished to find no trace of the brothers in the vault. The brothers had vanished. The story of the Carter brothers is one of many New Orleans vampire legends. These stories have likely been embellished, but Kim believes there is truth behind each of them." Who's Kim? Oh, some guy. Sorry, I probably should have. Some person named Kim.
Kim.
Kim's reading this story
Smoke
for
for
us.
Kim.
Standing in the spots they happen at, you can just feel the energy and feel that it really happened. Upon looking into the vampires of New Orleans, if you just Google Vampires of New Orleans, you'll find that not only do they have these legends like the Carter brothers, but they also have current communities of vampires that just kind of gather in New Orleans. So I found this CNN article, and it's called "Inside the World of Real Life Vampires in New Orleans and Atlanta, 2022. Oh my God, this guy. This guy is the king of the city's vampire court, and oh wow, look at his Android selfie.
Oh my. That guy, he can suck my blood whenever he wants. I'm kidding.
Anyway, there was like a history.com video or something going around showing this guy who does it, and he like gets his like victims who are just like willing random people on the internet that like go to his house.
That's
and he's like,
definitely a Craigslist thing.
he was like, "I always use alcohol swabs.
Oh my God.
I use a new blade every single time." And then he was like, "I poke holes like this," and he does it in the video, and he's like poking the hole with a scalpel or whatever blade on some random guy who was like a Gothic studies professor, which is like red
he's
flag.
into it.
Fire him.
Does he jerk off during it? Probably.
No, but like
someone does.
He does it for research.
Oh yes, he does it for research.
I always use alcohol swabs or alcohol pads before I do it, but he goes, "But it does leave an aftertaste."
Oh.
He's like, can I judge a vampire? Is that wrong? I don't know.
Out, he's gonna show up here.
In 50 years, his video is gonna be used against me. Like, she made fun of vampires.
You're gonna get canceled next year.
And according to NewOrleans.com, the vampire lore actually resurfaced specifically when Anne Rice, who is New Orleans born, wrote her Interview with the Vampire series in the 1980s. Have you heard of it? Interview with the Vampire? I think I have it on DVD.
What?
You've never heard of Interview with the Vampire?
No.
Oh, it's like a famous... Oh, you don't know your 80s Gothic movies. Just kidding. I think I only know it because it had boobies in it. And my dad used to watch it. The popularity of the books inspired her fans to visit her potentially haunted house on First Street in New Orleans. Whatever. It stirred the vampire frenzy in New Orleans, made it iconic even more than the legends. And also, New Orleans has a store called Boutique du Vampire in the French Quarter, which claims to be the only vampire shop in the country open to both mortals and vampires since 2003.
I wonder if that vampire guy just goes there and finds
people.
Yeah. Suck their blood.
But I feel like there's like a power play.
There's
like I feel like he doesn't
for
want.
That. There's a Reddit for everything.
Let's go.
Like a vampire Reddit.
Yeah, that's funny. We could do a whole podcast on vampires, but this is like the specific. This is like the New Orleans vampire. So that is it for this podcast episode, The Dark Side of New Orleans. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you did, make sure to give it a like, comment anything down below, subscribe to this channel because we post every single week here on Cauldron Convos. And I hope you guys have a happy Fat Tuesday. I guess Eat
it up, baby.
Eat it up, drink it up,
eat
do
it
it up,
eat it up,
do what you can before Lent. Is that what the point is? I don't know.
Yeah, Catholicism, yo.
I'll see you guys next time here on Cauldron Convos, baby. Woo! Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, Fat Tuesday.
Oh.